10:47 a.m. Marina del Rey, California. The fog rolls thick across the harbor, swallowing the masts of $200 million vessels lined like white teeth along the waterfront. A black Suburban kills its headlights 300 yards out. Then another. Then 6 more. They are not alone. Offshore, a Coast Guard cutter holds position with running lights extinguished, its bow pointed toward Slip 47, the deepwater berth reserved for vessels exceeding 150 feet. Inside the marina office, a night watchman who has been on payroll for 11 years is being quietly handcuffed at his own desk. He does not resist. He has been waiting for this night, perhaps, longer than the agents have. This was supposed to be a routine federal warrant service. A financial crimes inquiry. Suspected wire fraud tied to a campaign finance irregularity. Standard procedure. 43 agents. 2K9 units, a forensic accountant from the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. That is what the briefing said. That is not what they would find. By 4:12 a.m., the boarding teams had crossed the gangway of a 187-foot superyacht registered in the Cayman Islands under a shell corporation traced through 11 intermediary entities to one of the most powerful sitting officials in the state of California. By 4:19 a.m., the lead agent's radio went silent for 93 seconds. By 4:21 a.m., every available federal asset within a 200-mile radius was being redirected to Marina del Rey. Because what the agents found below the third deck was not financial fraud. It was something far worse. She was named Meridian's Promise. Teak decking imported from Burma. Italian leather staterooms. A helipad on the upper sundeck. A wine cellar climate controlled to 54 degrees Fahrenheit, stocked with bottles whose individual price tags exceeded the average California family's monthly mortgage. The yacht had been photographed exactly twice in public record, once at a 2022 charity gala in Monaco, and once during a campaign donor retreat off Catalina Island. The official narrative held that Meridian's Promise belonged to a private donor consortium. That narrative had survived 3 journalistic inquiries, 1 ethics complaint, and a perfunctory state audit. It would not survive the next 90 minutes. Federal agents moved deck by deck, weapons drawn, calling rooms clear in clipped tactical English. The galley. The salon, the owner's stateroom, empty, the bed neatly made, a half-finished glass of Macallan 25 on the nightstand, a pair of Italian loafers, size 11, monogrammed. Then, the lower deck, then the compartment behind the engine room bulkhead, accessible only through a hidden hatch concealed beneath a section of removable flooring in the crew quarters. What waited inside that compartment would force the United States Department of Justice to convene an emergency session before sunrise. 122 children, ages ranging from approximately 4 years old to 17, held in 3 modified cargo bays that had been retrofitted with bunk-style sleeping quarters, ventilation ducts disconnected from the yacht's primary HVAC system, and reinforced steel doors with exterior locking mechanisms. The bays had no windows. 2 had no functioning lights. The third was illuminated by a single LED strip that had been left on, agents would later note, because someone had forgotten to switch it off in their hurry. 47 of the children had no identification of any kind. 61 were determined, through subsequent forensic interviews and database cross-referencing, to be undocumented minors who had crossed the southern border within the previous 9 months. Children who had entered federal custody, been processed, and then disappeared from the tracking systems of the Office of Refugee Resettlement. 14 were American citizens reported missing from foster care placements in 3 different states. The youngest child, a girl believed to be 4 years old, could not state her own name. Federal agents would later testify that several of the children, upon being approached, did not run toward their rescuers. They flinched away. They had been conditioned, investigators concluded, to expect that the opening of those steel doors meant something else entirely. By 6:00 a.m., the operation had transformed. What began as a financial crimes warrant had become a multi-agency federal child trafficking investigation under the jurisdiction of the FBI's Violent Crimes Against Children section, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement's Homeland Security Investigations Division, and the United States Marshals Service. The Department of Health and Human Services dispatched 14 child welfare specialists to the marina within the hour. A field hospital was established in the marina's banquet hall, and the question every agent on that dock was now asking: The question that would define the next 72 hours of federal activity across 4 states was simple. How does a sitting governor's private yacht come to contain 122 trafficked children? The answer, when it came, would implicate not one official, but a network. Forensic accountants from FinCEN began processing seized financial records by 8:00 a.m. The yacht's onboard systems contained encrypted ledgers that, once decrypted under federal warrant, revealed the structure of an operation that had been running, by conservative estimate, for at least 6 years. The numbers were staggering. $98 million in liquid assets distributed across 47 offshore accounts in Belize, the Cayman Islands, Panama, and the Seychelles. $12 million in cryptocurrency held in cold storage wallets recovered from a safe in the master stateroom. Property holdings totaling another estimated $240 million across 3 countries, including a vineyard in Napa Valley, a beachfront estate on the Yucatan Peninsula, and a private island in the British Virgin Islands purchased in 2021 for $41 million cash. Wire transfers traced from these accounts revealed a pattern. Payments, substantial, regular, and structured to avoid federal reporting thresholds, flowing to 17 different recipients. A state senator, 2 members of the California Department of Social Services, a regional director within the Office of Refugee Resettlement, 3 officers of the California Highway Patrol, a federal immigration judge, 4 executives of a private contractor that held the state contract for unaccompanied minor housing facilities, a media consultant, a lobbyist, and, most damning of all, 3 members of a nonprofit organization that had been publicly celebrated as a model for migrant child welfare advocacy. Every recipient had been complicit. Every recipient had been paid. And every recipient, federal investigators would soon allege, had known precisely what their cooperation enabled. The man whose ownership of Meridian's promise would be established beyond reasonable doubt by midday Tuesday had spent the better part of a decade cultivating an image of progressive moral authority. He had championed legislation expanding child welfare funding. He had appeared at fundraisers for organizations serving trafficking survivors. He had, in a 2023 commencement address at a major university, declared that the measure of any society is how it treats its most vulnerable, and we will be measured. He had said those words. He had also, according to federal indictment documents unsealed Wednesday morning, personally coordinated the logistical infrastructure that allowed children, many of them the same vulnerable migrants whose protection he had publicly championed, to be moved from federal custody into the very networks his rhetoric condemned. The contrast was not incidental. It was operational. The public posture had not merely concealed the criminal enterprise. It had enabled it. Access to child welfare oversight committees. Influence over placement contracts. Relationships with federal officials whose cooperation could be quietly secured. Each platform had been a tool. Each speech had been camouflage. You have heard, perhaps, the phrase hiding in plain sight. This was its definition. At 11:43 a.m. Tuesday, federal agents executed simultaneous arrest warrants at 17 locations across California, Nevada, Arizona, and Florida. The governor was apprehended at a private airfield outside Sacramento, attempting to board a chartered jet with a flight plan filed for Dubai. He carried a leather valise containing 4 passports, 2 of them genuine diplomatic documents, 2 of them forged, and $340,000 in cash. He did not speak when read his rights. His attorney would arrive 40 minutes later. The state senator was arrested at his home in Palo Alto. The federal immigration judge was arrested in chambers mid-hearing. The 2 officers of the Department of Social Services were arrested at their respective offices in Sacramento, escorted past colleagues who had worked alongside them for years, and who, in subsequent interviews, would describe the moment with a single recurring phrase, "We had no idea." The 3 California Highway Patrol officers were arrested at a shift change. They had been the ones, prosecutors would later allege, who provided escort for vehicle convoys moving children between holding locations. The nonprofit executives were arrested at a fundraising luncheon in Beverly Hills. They had been, at the moment of arrest, accepting a humanitarian award. By 4 p.m., all 17 named defendants were in federal custody. Bond was denied in every case. The federal indictment, when unsealed, ran to 341 pages. It included charges of conspiracy to engage in human trafficking, conspiracy to engage in sex trafficking of minors, conspiracy to commit money laundering, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, conspiracy to obstruct justice, racketeering under the federal RICO statute, bribery of public officials, and, for the principal defendant, additional charges of witness tampering, obstruction of a federal investigation, and unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. Maximum sentences, if convicted on all counts, exceeded 400 years. The United States Attorney for the Central District of California, in a statement delivered from a podium at the federal courthouse Tuesday afternoon, addressed the gathered press in measured language that nevertheless carried an unmistakable weight. This investigation has revealed conduct that represents the most serious betrayal of public trust I have encountered in my career, she said. The defendants used positions of authority, positions granted them by the people of this state and this nation, to facilitate the exploitation of children. We will pursue accountability to the full extent permitted by federal law. We will not stop with the 17 individuals named today. This investigation is ongoing. She paused. To the children who were rescued, you are safe. To those still missing, we are coming. The 122 children removed from Meridian's Promise were transported to 3 separate federal medical facilities for evaluation. Reunification efforts began immediately for those whose families could be identified. For the others, the children whose names no records contained, whose families could not be traced, whose origins existed only in fragmentary memories of villages and journeys and faces, the work would be longer. The Office of Refugee Resettlement, under emergency directive from the Department of Health and Human Services, suspended 7 private contractors pending audit. 3 of those contractors immediately filed for bankruptcy. Federal subpoenas were issued for records spanning the previous 8 years. The state of California convened an emergency legislative session. 2 additional indictments were issued by Friday morning, naming a former federal prosecutor and a sitting member of a state child welfare oversight commission. The investigation, as the U.S. attorney had promised, was not finished. It was, by every available indication, only beginning. How did this happen? The question is not rhetorical. It demands an answer, because the answer is the only thing that prevents repetition. And the answer, as the indictment documents make clear, is not that the system failed. The system was used. Every safeguard that should have prevented this, the placement protocols, the oversight committees, the interagency coordination, the nonprofit advocacy networks, had been infiltrated, compromised, or co-opted. The very structures designed to protect vulnerable children had been transformed by patient and well-funded corruption into the infrastructure of their exploitation. The watchdogs had been bought, the advocates had been compromised, the officials sworn to protect had instead been profiting. This is not a story about one corrupt man and his yacht. It is a story about how concentrated wealth, political access, and institutional capture combine to produce systems in which the most vulnerable among us, children with no voice, no documentation, no advocate, become commodities. It is a story about what happens when the people who hold power over child welfare are also the people who profit from its absence. It is a story, finally, about how close such operations can come to never being discovered at all. The warrant served at Slip 47 on that foggy Tuesday morning was originally issued for financial irregularities of a kind that, in another jurisdiction or with another judge, might have been quietly settled and forgotten. The investigators who pursued it did so over the objections of supervisors who considered it a waste of resources. The boarding team that found the hidden compartment was not looking for what they found. The discovery was, in the most literal sense, an accident. How many other vessels are out there? How many other compartments? How many other children whose names no records contain, moving through systems that were supposed to protect them, into the hands of people who were supposed to be their protectors? These are not comfortable questions. They are not meant to be. You have read this account. You have seen the numbers. 122 children, $98 million, 17 defendants, 341 pages of charges. You have understood that the man whose face appeared on campaign posters and commencement stages was, at the same time, the architect of an operation that treated children as cargo. Do not let this story end with the closing of your screen. Demand transparency from your elected officials. Demand independent audits of every agency that handles the welfare of unaccompanied minors. Demand that federal whistleblower protections be expanded for the workers within those agencies who see what their superiors do not want seen. Support the journalists and investigators who pursue these stories when no one wants them pursued. Vote at every level of government for candidates whose records, not whose rhetoric, demonstrate commitment to the protection of children. The 122 children rescued from Meridian's Promise are alive because, on one foggy Tuesday morning, a small team of federal agents pursued a financial warrant with greater diligence than anyone expected. The next 122 children will depend on whether the rest of us can match that diligence. The fog lifts. The yacht is impounded. The defendants await trial. The work continues. And it belongs, now, to all of us.